What if I told you the world today isn't just unpredictable, it's following a script written a century ago, a script that led to one of history's darkest chapters, one that turned a thriving democracy into a nightmare almost overnight. Welcome to the Weimar Republic, an echo from the past that eerily mirrors the world today. But here's the real question. Are we watching history's shadow creep closer? Or is the world walking straight into them? How does a thriving democracy collapse into chaos? The answer is more familiar than you might think. The years between 1918 and 1933 saw Germany struggling to survive as a democracy after World War I. The Weimar Republic was supposed to be a fresh start, something better than the old German Empire, where the Kaiser ruled like a king. But instead, it became a cautionary tale of what happens when a nation falls into political chaos, economic ruin, and rising extremism. As historian Eric Weitz put it in his book Weimar Germany, Promise and Tragedy, the Weimar Republic was born with a hole in its heart. It was unloved by those who should have defended it. And the more you look at the world today, the more you see the patterns emerging once again. Weimar had elections, a parliament, and a president, but instead of unity, it had constant infighting, economic collapse, and leaders who couldn't hold the country together. Sound familiar? Today, governments worldwide struggle with gridlock. Trust in institutions is fading, and economic instability fuels radical movements. In some places, democracy is just an illusion, held together by fragile compromises. If the institutions you trusted started failing, where would you turn? This was the reality for millions during Weimar's final years. The Weimar Republic never collapsed in one big moment. It slowly unraveled, piece by piece, until there was nothing left to hold it together. Could the same be happening now? What happens when money becomes worthless overnight? The people of Weimar found out the hard way. Could it happen again? Weimar's economy was a disaster. Hyperinflation in the early 1920s wiped out people's life savings overnight. Imagine waking up one day and seeing that a loaf of bread costs 1,000 times more than it did yesterday. Or your morning Starbucks has tripled in price overnight. People carried wheelbarrows full of worthless cash just to buy groceries. Historian Adam Tooze, in his book The Wages of Destruction, The Making and Breaking of the Nazi Economy, described it this way. The inflation of the early 1920s left a deep psychological scar. It destroyed trust in institutions and convinced many that democracy was fragile and ineffective. Fast forward to today. Inflation is rising across the world. In some places, like Argentina and Venezuela, it's already at Weimar levels. In others, like the US and Europe, wages aren't keeping up with costs, and millions are struggling to get by. But it's not just inflation. The global economy is more fragile than ever. Debt levels are soaring, inequality is growing, and supply chains are stretched thin. But Weimar didn't fall all at once. It unraveled, one crisis at a time. The next part of the story shows just how quickly things can spiral. When people lose trust in the system, history shows they often turn to extreme solutions. The real question is, are we seeing the same pattern today? In the final years of Weimar, the streets were filled with chaos. Political fights turned into actual street battles between far-left communists and far-right Nazis. The government lost control, and people started looking for strongmen who could bring order by any means necessary. Historian Richard J. Evans observed, "People do not follow radical movements because of ideology alone, but because they are desperate, disillusioned, and searching for security." Now, look around today. Political violence is becoming more common. Protests are turning into riots. Trust in democratic institutions is eroding. The internet has made it easier than ever for radical movements to spread, creating echo chambers where people become convinced that their enemies must be destroyed. And it's not just in one place, it's everywhere. The political center is shrinking, and radical voices are getting louder. Weimar's biggest lesson is that democracy doesn't just collapse overnight. It falls bit by bit, until one day people wake up and realize it's gone. History never announces its turning points. By the time you realize you're living through one, the consequences are already unfolding. The Weimar Republic struggled to maintain control, and as we look at the modern world, we see similar patterns. Today's world is interconnected, but that interconnectedness can also feel like a web of chaos. Events in one country can send shockwaves across the globe. A war in Ukraine affects energy prices and food supply worldwide. A stock market crash in one country can ripple through the global economy. A political crisis in one region destabilizes entire continents. No one seems to be in control of the global system. Nations are facing massive challenges: climate change, economic instability, pandemics, political divisions. Yet instead of working together, they seem to be pulling apart. This feeling of uncertainty mirrors what was experienced in Weimar Germany. Just as the Weimar Republic's leaders struggled to maintain order in the face of rising economic and political turmoil, today's world appears caught in a cycle of crisis management rather than long-term stability. As historian Robert D. Kaplan writes in Wasteland, we are entering a new era of global cataclysm, a deadly mix of war, climate change, great power rivalry, rapid technological advancement, and the end of empire. Much like Weimar, the world today faces overlapping crises. The challenge is not just whether individual nations can maintain stability, but whether the global system itself is strong enough to withstand the pressures of an uncertain future. So, is the world doomed to repeat the fate of Weimar? Maybe. Maybe not. History rhymes, but it doesn't have to repeat. Weimar collapsed because its leaders failed, because its people lost faith, because the system was too weak to withstand the storms that hit it. But history isn't destiny. In his book On Tyranny, 20 Lessons from the 20th Century, Timothy Snyder reminds us that history does not repeat, but it does instruct. Weimar was a warning that economic collapse breeds extremism, a warning that when people lose faith in the system, anything can happen. But most of all, it was a warning that history never truly leaves us. It casts long shadows into the present. One question remains: will the world avert this shadow or walk straight into it?